Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for another reloading chat. So I'm going to load a little bit of 45 ACP. For those curious, this is 7.5 grains of accurate number 5 behind a 230 grain Montana Gold, using Winchester brass, Winchester large pistol primers. And a lot of stuff has come through lately. The last few days that I've seen through various news outlets, some of them official military type stuff. All this stuff is coming out that the military is now officially, at least the Army, is officially going to replace the M4 carbine and the SAW with a 6.8 cartridge weapon. But what's interesting is that it's kind of being kept secret. It's a mystery cartridge. All that we know is that it is not the 6.8 SPC, and you guys know the Army's marksmanship program developed the 6.8. It didn't meet their needs. General Mattis wanted it for the Marine Corps, but that never happened. And you know, it's a fine cartridge. Don't get me wrong. I think it's a great close-range hunting cartridge. But as far as the military's needs, I mean, when you look at it, I think where they messed up, they really made a solid intermediate cartridge for close range. I think the 6.8 is great for that. I could see it as fantastic for a close quarters weapon. I think it's fantastic 100-yard cartridge. Even good for big game at that distance. People are taking elk down and stuff with them. The problem is that they selected a design with the way the neck and everything is set up to where it's really designed to run lightweight bullets. So you see a lot of stuff in the 110, 120 grain range, and for a 27 caliber bullet, we end up with a ballistic coefficient that's actually worse than a lot of your stuff that's already in 223 and 5.56. So you have a bullet that's less aerodynamic, which means when we start getting out past 200 yards, you get up to 300 and beyond, we're getting a lot more bullet drop, and we're getting a serious loss of energy. So you have a bullet that starts out far more potent, bigger, heavier, more energy, which, you know, seems to fit the bill because, again, it was the lack of power for the 223 that was oftentimes the issue there. And what they've done, you know, by keeping the bullets lighter, they've kept the ammo a little lighter because ultimately you don't have a very heavy bullet for calibers, light for caliber bullet, but the end result is a bullet that really sucks at long range. When you start talking 400, 500, 600 yards, it sucks. Now, it's still pretty decent. I mean, it's decent, but it really has less energy when you start getting out further with a hell of a lot more drop and even more wind drift than the 5.56 already had. Now, it could be argued that could be compensated with ACOGs, and it would as far as training people to use that stuff as far as their doping goes. But it really was a trade-off. You ended up with a slightly heavier cartridge overall that would still work in the same platforms, that hit a bit hard, actually quite a bit harder in close, but when you start getting to intermediate and long range, it just falls really, really short. So you ended up with really a compromise cartridge. It was a major compromise, especially considering it's now more weight, which is the reason the 223 was selected. Its ammo is lighter. That you ended up losing performance at long range, but gained performance at close range. And again, the drop rate probably isn't as big of a deal if they issue more and more ACOGs or anything with the proper BDC on it. But, you know, it was problematic. But they did realize that something in the 6.5 to 6.8 range as far as the caliber goes, as far as millimeters. So that's something like basically a 26 up to about a 28 caliber. Seemed to fit the bill for what they wanted. I mean, the 6.5 Creedmoor kind of came out of that line of thought. And so they've got a mystery cartridge, and I'm actually going to be really curious how this is going to work out, because I think what we're going to end up happening, whatever they go with, as long as it's a normal cartridge, because there is some talk still of all this telescoping, whatever they call it, telescopic cartridges, which is a polymer case, which is like a tube with the bullet completely inserted inside. It just looks like a little lipstick tube. The problem they have, though, is that the weapons have to be really, really heavy, even though the ammo is lighter, which is not that great of a trade-off for guys on the field who have to hump it around. But that was part of the compromise they were working on, but those systems aren't fully in place. So there's some talk that it might end up being that, but if it isn't, we're dealing with a mystery cartridge, and we don't know what we're going to be seeing in terms of specifications. But if it's something that ends up with a good capacity that feeds well, but we end up with heavier bullets, right? We end up with something that can push a heavier bullet. What about something that's 130, 140 grain? and a 6.8 millimeter, if it's set up to do something like that, I think we might have a real winner. That is something that once the military implements it, if that's the case, and we're still stuck with a conventional cartridge here that's, again, brass and everything else, I think that will quickly take over the civilian market. I think you'll see, if that happens, a lot of people switching over to that and away from their 223. Now, if it's something that will still feed in the same platform, a lot of people are going to convert their ARs over. But if it's something that won't fit in that platform, I don't know. We're going to see the industry change a lot, because what tends to happen, these standardized military calibers, you guys all know that's what everyone preps with. Those become very popular cartridges because of the availability of reloading components, use brass, military surplus ammo, the fact that there's already military platforms that are proven with these systems. It tends to become very, very popular. That's why to this day 223 and 308 are still so popular, even though we could argue that better cartridges exist. You know, it's just like the 308. I'm a big fan of 308, and 6.5 Creedmoor is trying to overtake it, but it was standardized for so long, and it's just the availability of stuff, because it was so standardized that it's actually very difficult to unseat. There's just so much load data, so many components available, so many weapons available in 308, and it still has its own perks. In spite of the fact that at punching paper at long distance, the 6.5 is better. You know, there's a lot of arguments back and forth, and I'm a big fan of the 308. But I'll be curious to see what they come up with here. If they come up with a 6.8 cartridge that we can reload, that becomes standardized, we can get all of our modern sporting rifles chambered in it easy. We get some compatibility of components, and it ends up correcting the flaws that I think we have with the 6.8, which means it's stuck with lightweight bullets. So again, if it's where we can get good accuracy out of, say, 140 grain with something that's maybe close to that case capacity, maybe a little more, maybe a little less, and it becomes standardized, that'll be interesting. That's something I would consider investing in personally, because as it stands now, I'm still leaning in the direction of pushing more towards 308 for most of my personal stash. A lot of what I'm doing in the long term. But, you know, if something like that comes out that could unseat it with a lighter, more maneuverable platform, again, if we can stick with something that's an AR-15 size platform instead of AR-10, you know, that'll be interesting. But the main thing for a lot of us, we just want more punch, more versatility, more hunting ability out of our most common platform that we use, our most common caliber. And I think that's the big flaw with the 223, which again kind of comes back to what the military's problem with it was. Just they want a little more power. They want something with a little more oomph behind it. And so that's pretty much what they're doing, and we know that's been their goal all this time. But the thing is, they're keeping it secret for now. So it's going to be interesting to see what cartridge they actually release. I'm going to be keeping an eye on this. I'm really hoping it's not the lipstick tube telescoping cartridges just yet. I'm really hoping it's not, because that doesn't work very well for reloaders, hand loaders, all of us out here. That's not really our ideal situation unless we find a good way to reload these polymer tubes. But I guess we'll have to watch and see. We'll have to wait and see what's going on. And if it turns out to be a more conventional cartridge that all of us can hand load, reload, things like that, I think that's going to be a big hit. And if it turns out to be what I'm hoping it's going to be, in terms of specifications, it's something I would personally invest in. So I'm just going to wait and see what happens, just like everyone else. But I wanted people to be aware it has been announced. They have officially put this in. Multiple companies are now submitting designs for testing, and they're allowing FN to submit 2 different weapon platforms. So we'll see what happens with it, see how their testing goes, and see what the military implements. And that's just, if that happens, it'll just be a matter of time before we start getting military surplus ammo. And when that happens, you're going to see probably a pretty big changeover in the industry once the military officially adopts a new primary rifle cartridge. So we'll see how this goes. All right, guys, so that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.